I was reading about Gold Rush food one day and came across a book that mentioned a miner's favorite dish, Hangtown fry, like an oyster omelette, was actually invented by a Chinese cook. Is it true that one of the most classic Gold Rush dishes is Chinese in origin? We will find out in today's episode. My name is Christy, and this is the American Chinese Food Show. Hangtown is today's Placerville, a gold rush town in the Sierra foothills northeast of Sacramento in California. It got its name because a few miners decided to hang some criminals, taking the law into their own hands. How did the dish come about? There are two versions. The first version from the editors of American Heritage Cookbook. Hangtown Fry was created in 1849. Just a year after gold was discovered. A miner hailed into Hangtown with a poke full of nuggets, plunked his fortune down on the counter of Carey House, and said he wanted the finest, most expensive meal they had. When he was told that oysters and eggs were the most expensive items on the menu, he told the cook to put them together and serve up the food. The second version is very different, almost the opposite. A guy was sentenced to be hanged. When asked what he wanted for his last meal, he said he'd like to have eggs scrambled with oysters, and he insisted the oysters had to be those little ones from Puget Sound. By the time they got the oysters shipped from thousands of miles away, the guy's friends busted him out of jail already. What is the evidence that Hangtown Fry is Chinese? Here's a quote from the book Gold Rush Grub. In his study of eating habits among miners of the West, bacon, beans, and galantines, food historian Joseph R. Conlon theorizes that the cook who prepared the dish was certainly Chinese, because it can be seen as a variation of the Cantonese dish egg foo young. Whoa, that's it? Because there's a similar egg dish in Cantonese cuisine? Most cuisines have egg dishes. And sure, there were Chinese cooks in the Gold Rush era, mostly working in private homes, but this claim just doesn't really make sense to me, and here's why. Many of you have probably heard this many times. Most of the miners from China back in the days came from Guangdong, a province in southern China, but a huge majority of them were from a region called Sze Yap, now Jiangmen City, specifically in the county of Taishan. You can learn more about this from my previous episode. Seafood in the area is abundant. Oysters are amazing. For a Taishanese oyster to pass so-called its test, it needs to meet three criteria. The meat needs to be tender, white, and also plump. Some oyster dishes in the region include stewed oysters with ginger and scallion and white pepper oyster soup. But the most famous, of course, is dried oyster, ho si. We use dried oysters to make a braised dish for the Lunar New Year. You can also make different soups with it, along with bitter melon, gourd, lotus root, or winter melon, and congee, Chinese porridge, and a stir fry with Chinese sausages. We know dried oysters were even sold in stores available for Chinese gold miners and railroad workers in the 19th century. That's how much we love our dried oysters. But people in Sze Yap don't have a dish that mixes oysters with eggs. This is why I think it's very unlikely Hangtown Fry is Chinese in origin. Also, egg foo young as a Chinese dish has a completely different history, which I hope to cover in a different episode in the future. However, there is a regional dish that does mix oysters and eggs in Guangdong. In the Chaoshan region, which is further east, is Teochew oyster pancakes called lo. Lo is the name of the cooking technique in the Teochew dialect in which food is pan-fried in a wok using a spatula. For this dish, you use the freshest baby mud oysters. I grew up eating this dish in the red light district in Hong Kong, where you can get Teochew food in the street. Teochew people are one of the biggest diasporic ethnic groups from China. They are everywhere in Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Malaysia, and more. So how do the two dishes compare? Hangtown Fry, a gold rush dish made in the late 1800s from scarce resources, and Teochew oyster pancakes, a homey country dish that utilizes fresh local ingredients. I'll make both today and see. Hangtown fry was expensive at a gold rush town because, according to the El Dorado County Historical Museum, the eggs were seagull eggs from the Farallon Islands off San Francisco that had to be carefully wrapped during the long trek from the coast. The oysters had to be packed in ice, which was a luxury before refrigerators. I just got my bag of frozen oysters from an online grocery store that delivers. How times have changed. I specifically wanted the smaller variety of oysters, so I didn't get oysters fresh in a glass jar. The first recipe published in the newspaper on Hangtown fry is from 1917. You first fry sausage rings, put in oysters until the edges curl, stir in the eggs and cook until they are set. Stir as for scrambled eggs. But I'm using this recipe from the Los Angeles Times in 1924 instead, that doesn't use sausages. You first brown California oysters, coated in flour in hot butter. Cook eggs and stir over a slow fire until it's a soft scramble. Then add the oysters and serve on toast. I personally love oysters, so there's nothing not to love with this dish. I could see adding some green onions maybe to spice it up a bit. Hangtown fry was pretty popular, popping up in seafood restaurants throughout the decades. You can still find Hangtown fry in many restaurants today in Northern California. I read this article in the LA Times featuring the only restaurant still serving Hangtown fry in Placerville, the birthplace of this dish today. Apparently, no one working at the restaurant had tried the dish because they found it nasty. I think they're missing out. Now, let's make the Teochew oyster pancake. Wash the oysters with salt and flour. I also blanched the oysters with a bit of ginger for just about 30 seconds. If you want your pancake really crispy, you use half chicken eggs and half duck eggs. I am just using chicken eggs here. The key ingredient to a crispy yet fluffy oyster pancake is sweet potato flour. 1 tablespoon of sweet potato flour to 1 egg. Add a bit of cornstarch, white pepper, fish sauce, mix with the oysters and green onion. I really hate coriander, so I'm skipping. Heat a frying pan to high heat. Pan-sear the oysters. Pour the egg mixture in. Fry until golden. Flip once, and you're done. I dip it in a bit of fish sauce and sriracha. I have used this recipe many times, and it's always awesome to be able to make a dish pretty similar to what I used to have when I was a kid, even though I am so far away from home. Anyway, I see some similarities in the two dishes, I guess, like how you first pan fry the oysters and you try to make the eggs very smooth with either adding milk or in the Teochew version, sweet potato flour. I very much want my childhood favorite dish to be the origin story of a Gold Rush classic, but I just think it's a bit far-fetched. That's it for today's episode. If you like our content, subscribe to our channel. See you soon.